The name of Spartacus has become legendary. He is the gladiator, the freedom fighter, the slave who freed 100,000 slaves. He turned them into an army strong enough to take on the ancient world's greatest power, Rome. But behind the myth is a very different story. Spartacus was a man who was born not into slavery, but into freedom. Who first learned to fight not in the arena, but on the battlefield as a soldier in the Roman army. He was a vicious killer. A tactical genius, driven by rage. Destroyed by his loyalty to the men who followed him. This is his story. Capua, Italy, 73 BC. A breakout. A gang of 70 escaped slaves. Trained fighters loose in the Italian countryside. Their number will grow to make them the most dangerous internal threat ever faced by the Roman Republic. The gang becomes a mob, the mob becomes an army, taking back their freedom, taking their revenge. Their leader is Spartacus. Mythmakers and propagandists have painted him as a freedom fighter, a cross between Robin Hood and Martin Luther King.
Spartacus is the rebel. He is the liberator. He is the hero who fights against the empire.
But the real story is very different. It is one of courage and hope, but it begins in great humiliation. When Spartacus first appears in the ancient accounts, he is a slave. A piece of Roman property.
He doesn't matter. He is faceless, like millions of other faceless people. And it's only when he begins to strike out that those who write, those who record history, start to take some notice.
The ancient sources suggest that around 100 BC, Spartacus was born in Thrace. Now covered by modern-day Bulgaria, it was an unstable territory on the fringes of Rome's empire, peopled by warring tribes. The real Spartacus is defined by his background. According to the myth, he was born the lowest of slaves, but this isn't so. Spartacus was born free, and he would always be driven by memories of that freedom. And again, contrary to the myth, he had not always been Rome's enemy. Once he had been part of the system. He had been a Roman soldier.
I think he joined the army because that's what poor Thracians do. It was an opportunity for him. And because he was asked to march against his own people, he said, no, I'm not doing this, and he deserted. That's when they brought him back. That's when he was sold as a slave.
Rome had trained Spartacus. It was not about to just let him go. Any deserter will be tracked down and captured. The punishment for desertion was enslavement. We know that his wife was taken too. History does not record her name, but it's clear that she was also sold as a slave. So they are together, but their lives are not their own. They have become mere goods in a vast trade whose center is Rome. Spartacus and his wife are dragged 1,000 miles from their homeland to Italy.
He had gone from being a person to being a non-person. He has no rights, he has no status, He can be bought, he can be sold, he can be beaten to death. He just belongs to somebody else. And that must have been the most horrific experience for anybody.
In Roman thinking, slaves are a symbol of personal prosperity and a measure of the nation's success.
50,000 people here, 100,000 people there, 150,000 people here. For the Romans, slaves are simply human beasts of burden or living tools.
And through the ownership of slaves, worked to death on vast agricultural estates, a handful of private individuals are able to amass vast wealth.
I think the easiest way to imagine what Rome is like is to conceive of it as a mafia state in which there are multiple godfathers all competing for slices of the pie, and yet they all recognize certain standards of honor and dishonor, certain codes that are universally acknowledged.
One such man is this man, Marcus Licinius Crassus. This is Rome's richest citizen. He began his career buying up the property of condemned men.
He is haughty, he is arrogant, and he can afford literally to buy legions. He can set them up. He can make and break other politicians, and that makes him enormously important. He is the man that Rome will ultimately turn to destroy Spartacus.
Crassus's business is the pursuit of more gold, more power. Slaves are the means he uses. He owns farms where they outnumber the free many times over. But Spartacus isn't working in the fields. He is locked up 60 miles outside Rome in the city of Capua. He has been sold as a gladiator. He will be trained to fight and kill for public entertainment.
The way you instill the will to kill is through training. So it doesn't feel like they're actually doing something out of the ordinary. But when choosing a gladiator, there's something else, there's an X factor that you need. It's some quality inside the individual that drives them to do the unspeakable.
Spartacus must feel very confused by his time at Capua. He's been taken as a slave, he has been sold, and he now has to entertain the crowd. A crowd that wants to see him die. And I think that creates a total storm in Spartacus's head.
This place is known for its cruelty. Its brutal regime of combat training produces men for whom violence is a way of life. But Spartacus forms a bond here with one of the other gladiators, a Gaul called Crixus.
He is already oppressed, he is already a slave, he already has this sense of bitterness and resentment against his captors and therefore against Rome. It's made worse in Capua because here he is being trained to kill, he's being trained to die.
Crixus and Spartacus eat, sleep, and train with 200 other men, all becoming skilled with a range of weapons, all being kept at a peak of physical fitness, all being held against their will. This appears a highly volatile situation, and yet the Romans don't appear too concerned.
I don't think that Rome is scared of her slaves because she assumes that she will be able to crush any servile revolt. Her citizens are free, slaves are not. Free always prevail over the servile. That is a rule of nature as far as the Romans are concerned.
Within any close-knit group of people who are being held against their will, There will be a kind of bonding within those people. But also there'll be an aspect of biding your time. All the time there's information gathering going on.
A plan is formed to overpower the guards. They use improvised weapons, roasting spits, cleavers. The guards are heavily armed, but the gladiators have spent their days practicing hand-to-hand combat.
They hacked the guards.
It's an explosion of purposeful anger. They want revenge, and they want to get away.
It would have to have been done quickly, because these men wanted to get out before any reinforcements could be sent for. This is every Roman's worst nightmare, I suppose. These are the men you have trained to kill, and they are now killing you. Must have been an absolutely devastating hour, and I doubt whether it lasted for more than that, before the slaves have killed everybody in the compound and have gone.
Suddenly they are armed and free. They make their escape into the countryside. Before this anger has burnt out, it will consume tens of thousands of lives. These 74 men are no longer slaves. They are fugitives. And as the adrenaline subsides, they're confronted with the question, what next?
That moment of euphoria would have passed very quickly, because they were wanted men, and they would have realized that when they were caught, they would be killed. They need a plan, they need a shape, they need some kind of structure in their lives.
The gladiators know that they need a leader. The man that they elect is Spartacus.
Spartacus must have had qualities of leadership. Men must have stopped and listened when Spartacus spoke to them.
First off, there would be his personal charisma, which obviously he had in spades. He was the kind of person that people listened to and would follow. And second, he seems to have had a vision. He had an idea what to do.
The first days after the breakout are about survival. They'll need food, clothing, and weapons. They travel through the countryside of southern Italy, stealing as they go.
He's a man with a plan. They're going to organize themselves into a fighting mobile unit, and they're going to disappear off country.
They make for the sparsely populated slopes of the dormant volcano of Vesuvius. Spartacus plans to make a base on the remote high ground. There they'll be able to prepare a defense for the moment when Rome responds. Meanwhile, news of the escape reaches the city. The men of the Senate hear what's happening. They know they have to act, but they don't believe this is any kind of crisis. To them, this isn't a national emergency.
This is a local problem, a police action, not something we need to bestir ourselves about.
74 slaves is barely a fighting force. It's certainly not enough to disrupt the daily lives of Rome's elite.
Capua might as well have been thousands of miles away, in that Rome sees itself as the center of the universe and completely invincible.
A militia of 3,000 men is assembled to go and recapture the slaves.
The Romans who are sent out against Spartacus are not seasoned legionaries. These are raw recruits. These are at best rookies on the police force, and they're the ones who have been charged with fighting these gladiators.
The man who led them was an unknown official called Glaber, who seems to have been totally inexperienced, totally naive, no doubt did not take the threat seriously.
Glaber and his men march south to Vesuvius. And Rome goes about its business. Sometime later, the first reports arrive of what had happened. Glaber had come to the foot of the mountain. He had believed that he'd blocked Spartacus's only route down.
He's so confident he doesn't bother to fortify his camp. This is a major sin in Roman military thinking.
It is an embarrassing tale to hear. The Roman commander had been complacent and lazy.
We are talking here not just about an ordinary slave revolt. We are talking about a revolt by gladiators, men trained to kill. We are talking about a revolt led by an extraordinary man, one of the most dynamic men of the ancient world, in fact.
There had been another way off the mountain. The steep cliff to the rear of Glaber's camp. Spartacus had ordered his men to weave ropes from vines. Then they had abseiled down and launched a stealth attack when all but a few sentries were asleep. A massacre had followed. Spartacus had taken the camp and everything in it.
You'd have had gladiators used to hand-to-hand combat, taking on these Romans who are used to fighting in open squares, in formation. It was no contest.
This is the point where a mere escape becomes a rebellion.
This is a wonderful gesture of defiance. He is saying, look, I can take this away from you whenever I like. You had the temerity to send these useless people against me. You are not treating me with the respect you should, and here is proof of that. I now have the formal trappings of your power.
What happens on Vesuvius sends out a message. It says that the Roman machine can be beaten by people who should be beneath its contempt. As word spreads, it ignites something in slaves all over southern Italy. They see in what Spartacus is doing a chance for freedom, and many simply run away from their masters. These men aren't gladiators. Most of them were laborers in the fields. They've never fought in battle, but they want Spartacus to command them. They become his responsibility. And they have different backgrounds. They speak different languages. As well as Thracians like Spartacus, there are Gauls, Germans, captives taken from wherever Rome's armies have fought.
They have the same goal, perhaps, the same quest for freedom, but that is an idyllic aim. It's not a reality.
It is for Spartacus to confront the reality. They are on the run.
He said, we're going to stay together, we're going to be disciplined, we're going to plunder the countryside for everything that we need, we're going to fight the Romans, and we're going to win.
Spartacus the slave has become a leader of men. And he has to get on with the practical business of fighting a war. He knows that in an open battle, Rome would wipe these people out. An illegal insurgent force against the world's mightiest power. He must wage a guerrilla campaign. Spartacus faces months as a fugitive. He will be hunted by Roman militias. But he knows somehow how to outthink them all.
Spartacus doesn't have much choice except to fight dirty. They're going to attack when they don't expect it, where they don't expect it.
According to one report, when it appeared again that his troops had been cornered by the Roman forces, Spartacus waited till dark, and he gave the order for corpses to be tied to stakes in the ground. At a distance, they looked like guards. Spartacus sneaked his men out under cover of night. It wasn't until the dawn came that the Romans realized they had been laying siege to an empty camp. Spartacus shows an exceptional talent for frustrating his enemy, far greater than what could be expected of a slave, even a gladiator.
He was particularly good at what we might call today unconventional warfare, even to a certain degree guerrilla warfare.
The Spartacus of myth is a slave who came from nowhere. But in truth, it's clear that he understands their tactics because he has been a Roman soldier. The Roman army is a military machine with a specific way of fighting. He has been part of that machine. He understands its strengths and its weaknesses.
He's going to be able to understand the mentality of the Roman soldier. He's going to understand their tactics. He's going to understand their equipment. And he's going to know how to use that against them.
He's going to know how to fight them in a way that they can't handle. He can pick his battles, choose rough terrain where it's difficult to deploy large numbers of men. That way, he can inflict damage, humiliation after humiliation on the troops that Rome sends against him. With every Roman he kills, with every slave he recruits, Spartacus gets stronger. But can his army ever be strong enough to match the full power of the Roman war machine? Rome's leaders are finding it hard to respond adequately to the danger they face. The fact that the slaves have rebelled is above all an embarrassment. Their great generals and hardened legions are overseas seeking glory. None are yet willing to return to deal with Spartacus.
Above all, the reason that generals don't come forward and say, right, let's sort this out, is that there is absolutely no honor in defeating a slave. There is honor in defeating foreign armies, that's fine. But at this stage, Spartacus is not seen anything like as that status.
And so for almost a year, Rome keeps losing.
The Romans send further armies against him, each time taking it a little bit more seriously, but never seriously enough.
In the months that follow the breakout, Spartacus evades or defeats every force that is sent against him. One commander loses his horse and is forced to flee the battlefield on foot. Another, Cassinus, doesn't manage to get away. Rome's hesitation, its repeated failure to act decisively, gives Spartacus a chance. A chance to organize, to deal with a following that has grown beyond all recognition. Rome's hesitation, its repeated failure to act decisively, gives Spartacus a chance. A chance to organize, to deal with a following that has grown beyond all recognition. Thousands of people are with him now. More come every day. Some say there are women and children with him. Some even say that free peasants join them. They keep moving, plundering, freeing slaves in every town they pass through. The momentum is such that within a year, what was a band of 74 gladiators will grow into a mass of 100,000 people.
I think the motive for people joining Spartacus was the dream of freedom. Each success made that more likely.
But it's not just a dream he gives them. He makes a gesture which has allowed historians and storytellers down the ages to paint him as an idealist, a reformer, a kind of social revolutionary.
You've got a leader who's actually dividing the spoils equally amongst his men. And that's really refreshing to hear that in history. And that's one of the things that's very appealing to us now, I believe. There seems to be a genuine feeling for equality about him.
He is effectively the leader of a new community. "100,000 mouths to feed," the equivalent of a mid-sized modern city.
The larger the army, the bigger the problems of actually keeping them alive. In Spartacus, I think we're talking about a true leader. He has that ability to understand strategy rather than tactics. It's off the battlefield stuff as well as on the battlefield stuff. So the whole clothing and feeding of his army, this becomes something that he does, and he seems to do it very well.
With a force grown this large, Spartacus knows that he can no longer keep fighting a hit-and-run, guerrilla-style war.
In Spartacus's mind, somewhere he has to know that someday those veteran legions that are now in Spain and Greece and Judea and Syria are going to come back to put down this revolt. And then it will be an entirely different game.
These are the troops that have carved an empire. They have crushed nations. Spartacus must prepare his men to match these legions in battle, or they will be cut down. But his actions aren't selfless. For everything he's doing, he also has a personal motive.
For Spartacus, freeing the slaves was a means to an end. He proposes to take this army and to march through the length of the Italian peninsula, through hostile territory, and then to cross the Alps and to scatter home. This is no mean undertaking.
And this is what he is building his army for. They will cut themselves a path. They will fight their way north. He will forge his band of fighting slaves into drilled, disciplined soldiers. Training and equipping them for the march will perhaps be Spartacus's single greatest achievement.
I think Spartacus organizes his troops by delegation. I think he takes his core gladiators, he takes these 70 men, and he instills in them what is necessary to train the rest.
And they look after a group of people who would then train another group of people who then train another group of people.
It's a highly efficient system of command and training, one which enables him to ready his men in a matter of weeks. Again, he is using knowledge that he gained when he served in the army of Rome. He has a perfect model of military efficiency to work from. He knows how to fight fire with fire.
I think what Spartacus is creating with his army is another Roman army, because that's all he knows.
The result is a force to be reckoned with. Men who no longer feel that they need to run. And this in itself creates a new problem for Spartacus. Some of his men grow overconfident. A dissenting faction emerges. It is led by Crixus, the gladiator who's been with Spartacus since the breakout.
هكا ولا ياك هاو مالا رومانوس نكي داري فانوموس أورم كوكيموس فاميناس كوبيموس ننسوموس إجناوي.
Spartacus cannot save these men from themselves. They believe that they don't need to escape with him. Instead, they think that they can stay in Italy and fight Rome head-on.
Essentially, what split them apart was that Crixus was thinking short-term, and Spartacus, I feel, was thinking longer-term.
It becomes clear that the two men and the factions they lead cannot stay together. Crixus abandons Spartacus.
We know that when Spartacus marches north in 72 BC, that Crixus and his men, perhaps as many as 30,000 men, don't come with him. They stay in the south. That's a significant loss.
It's a loss that weakens and divides the slave army at the very time that Rome launches its counter-strike. A new force of professional troops has been tasked with the slaves' destruction.
Whether the Romans knew that this split had happened, we don't know. It's entirely feasible. The Romans were an incredibly organized people, after all, and they may well have timed that to perfection, knowing that with Spartacus's command split, that would make their life so much easier.
This is the inevitable response that Spartacus had feared. The Roman war machine in full battle formation. Two separate armies are dispatched from Rome. The first heads north to block Spartacus's path. The second hounds Crixus to the mountains on Italy's east coast. He may be a great warrior, but he is no general. His outnumbered force is no match for these new troops. They are easily crushed, and Crixus dies fighting. Then, both Roman forces set their sights on Spartacus. He is in the Apennine Hills of central Italy.
Spartacus was grief-stricken over the death of Crixus, and he took the death of Crixus as a very personal affront.
Crixus may have deserted Spartacus, but Spartacus will avenge his death. His grief shows itself as rage.
This is one of the most astonishing moments in his story, because I think the Romans still expect him to run. They expect him to retreat before them, and he doesn't. He actually comes out fighting.
When Spartacus's men hit the first consular army, it is with such a force that the Romans turn and run. He brings his army round, attacks the second army, destroys that too. Only now does he concentrate on the business of getting away from Rome. Hacking a path, killing everyone, everything that stands in his way. He will go home. After weeks of fighting, hundreds of miles of marching, Spartacus brings his slave army, as many as 70,000 people, into the foothills of the Alps. They stand at the boundary of Rome's empire. They are almost out of reach. This is what Spartacus has been aiming for. The split from Crixus, the killing, the months of hardship, have all been about this moment. Spartacus will cross these mountains. He will leave Rome behind. He will return to Thrace, his homeland.
Spartacus achieves the extraordinary. And the only thing standing between him and freedom are the snow-covered Alps.
But even now, it could all be for nothing. One great army can still block his escape. His own army.
I think there may have been a moment when Spartacus is trying to persuade his people that freedom is just over those snow-capped mountains, and they refuse.
Having traveled the vast distance north, his men will not take this final step.
He couldn't take the army with him. They didn't want to go. At that point, it feels like he's failing.
Faced with the reality of crossing to the cold, primitive north, or staying, plundering rich Roman lands, they choose to stay. And they demand that Spartacus stays with them.
Spartacus, the leader, not just of a rabble, not just a killing machine, not just a general, but a man who really does care about his people. And they have expectations of him. And he feels duty-bound to stay with them, to continue in that role as their leader. He is not interested in more of the same. I think he's tired, I think he wants to go home, I think enough is enough. But I don't think his people see it that way.
And division spells disaster. When Crixus went his own way, he and his men were killed. The slaves must be united, and that means Spartacus must lead them. Since they will not give way, he must. He has never yielded to Rome's troops, but he now yields to his own.
At the point where Spartacus is persuaded to return back into Italy, I think there's an air of inevitability about his failure. He was going back into the lion's mouth, and I think there was an air of doom about what was about to happen.
They have thrown away the chance to escape and put themselves on a collision course with their former masters. There is only one direction in which Spartacus can lead his men. They must go south, and in the south lies Rome. The army he heads is depleted, but it is battle-hardened, confident of its own ability to win. He can use his troops simply to ravage the countryside, keep moving, plundering, killing, taking what they want and daring someone to stop them. Or perhaps they could go for the ultimate prize. Could they actually intend to bring down the Roman state? Spartacus's intentions remain hidden from Rome. But as news arrives that he is moving south, the world's greatest city is hit by a wave of fear. All its people know is that there is a force of slaves heading their way. Suddenly, its senators feel vulnerable. And Rome's richest man, Marcus Licinius Crassus, seizes an opportunity. He knows that for the man that saves Rome, there will be honor, power, and status.
Spartacus and Crassus couldn't be more different. Spartacus has a humanitarian streak that shines out through history at us, whereas Crassus was self-serving, an aristocrat, incredibly wealthy, and a bully.
Crassus is hailed by those who know him as the most intimidating, the most powerful man in Rome. And almost everything that is written about him testifies to, if not his charisma, then his menacing and intimidating allure.
Crassus is given command. He isn't a great military leader, but he does have gold.
Crassus is the organizer. He's the brains behind. He is not a front man.
He once declared that a man isn't truly wealthy unless he can buy his own army. And now he is true to his word. The Senate gives him 4 legions, he pays for another 6 out of his own pocket. A force of around 60,000 well-trained troops. They set out to attack Spartacus. But battle doesn't come immediately. Crassus's legions find themselves marching after an enemy that is constantly on the move. Because Spartacus still wants to avoid all-out confrontation. He bypasses Rome. He doesn't attack it. He has a new goal in mind. He wants to get to Sicily.
The only viable alternative I feel he's got at this point is to establish themselves somewhere in Italy where they remain as one.
Sicily is bandit country. Roman rule there is weak. It's a place where Spartacus could regroup, recruit, prepare himself properly to fight Crassus.
I get the impression that whatever plan Spartacus may have in mind, that this is the last throw of the dice here. He actually has nowhere else to go. There is an element of desperation in it.
Somewhere there are ships that Spartacus has hired. Handed over gold so that they will meet him here and ferry his men over the water. But the 2-mile distance across the Straits of Messina might as well be 1,000 miles. Because the realization dawns that those ships are never going to come. He has been cheated, and his army will never reach Sicily. There is no way out. And having marched so far, Spartacus and his men have trapped themselves. They've backed into a corner. Crassus advances. He has his men build a fortification 35 miles long across the whole tour of Italy. He blocks any path of escape. The two armies face each other across a no-man's land.
He's showing that he's got the time, he's got the manpower, he's got the money to contain this man until he's going to kill him.
Spartacus will not be bowed by any demonstration of Roman might. He chooses his moment, makes a gesture of his own. He drags a Roman prisoner out into the no-man's land and nails him to a cross.
Crucifixion is a punishment that is applied to slaves. Roman citizens are not crucified, and on the very, very rare occasions where we do hear of it happening, it is scandalous and shocking. So Spartacus is deliberately humiliating Rome by crucifying one of her soldiers, one of her citizens. It's not just an execution, it's a deliberate attempt to humiliate a superpower.
It's a gesture of defiance and contempt. It's designed to stir anger and hatred, not only in his enemies, but in his own side too.
What this is a moment of utter defiance. Spartacus, I think, was almost certainly outnumbered by now. I think he knows that he can't win. He's only a matter of time. We're talking days, weeks at most. Somehow he has to break through those defenses. But he just wants to show his total contempt of the military machine that he's facing.
Because this crucifixion serves as a statement from a commander to his men. It is a warning, a prophecy, a rallying cry. Fight for your lives, for your dignity. Because this is how it will end.
He can't go over the Alps, he can't go back to Sicily, he can't attack Rome. So all he can do here is try and kill Crassus or die trying.
As he has done so many times before, Spartacus prepares for combat. As a gladiator, he fought for the entertainment of his Roman masters. But for almost 2 years, he has killed Romans. Now the final killings must take place. Tens of thousands of people from all corners of the empire, united by this man into a force that had struck fear into the heart of Rome. Thousand slaves against 10 Roman legions, and at the center of it all, Spartacus. He tries to fight his way to Crassus, the enemy he has never faced. He is impossibly outnumbered. Spartacus's body will never be found. When the battle is over, the dead will be too many to count. Some say 30,000 slaves are killed, some say 60,000. And yet for Crassus, victory on the battlefield isn't enough. He feels the need for one more big gesture. He will show the world how mighty Rome is, and he will show Rome how mighty he, Crassus, has become. He crucifies slaves, 6,000 slaves, along Rome's most important highway, the Appian Way. With the lives of these men, Crassus is trying to create his own legend, to buy his place in history. And in this, at least, he fails.
Crassus wins the battle, but in a certain sense, Spartacus wins the war. Because Spartacus is our hero today. We've all heard of Spartacus. He is a legend. Whereas Crassus is most definitely an also-ran.
Crassus cannot dictate history. His name will be all but forgotten. The name of Spartacus endures.
Spartacus's legacy is that people don't have to accept what they were born with, what they've had thrust upon them. And someone can rise above this, fight, demand their rights, demand their freedom, and perhaps accomplish great things. He came very close to pulling it off.
Spartacus is a great man. I can't think of any other way to put it. He is a leader for his own time and a leader for all times. We might not understand every single decision that he made, but we know where he was coming from, we know what he stood for, and we applaud that, today perhaps more than ever.